Okay, start it again.
Okay. Hey guys, welcome to the Kubernetes SIG storage volume populators meeting. Looks like we have a small crowd today. I just wanted to follow up on two items from last week that we were not able to resolve, and talk about the holidays and when we're going to get back together, and we can discuss progress as well. The first issue was one of naming. So as we discussed last week, there's I found 5 different places where this new controller will introduce user visible names into the system. There's the name of the CRD itself, the name of the controller that will run in the system. All of the RBAC objects are named after the controller, but they all have names. There's the source of the events that the controller will be generating, and then there's the event reason. And before I get too far down the path here, I wanted to get all the names right. So what I have been calling these things volume populator. You know, we started off with generic data populator, but I think that was sort of confusing. First of all, generic doesn't really help ordinary users understand what's going on. It was more helpful to us as a SIG to distinguish it from, you know, things like cloning volumes and snapshots. And then I think adding the word volume was helpful to describe what is being populated. But the controller name, it's far less obvious that populator controller is the right name for this thing that watches PVCs and looks at their data sources and generates events. So last week, the proposal came up, maybe call it data source controller, or maybe even to change the word controller to something else like validator, verifier, something, because controller implies that it's going to be, you know, enforcing some mechanic, and all we're really doing here is just watching them and generating events. So to call it a controller is a little bit grandiose. So I'm still sort of mixed between sticking with the name populator because that's what it's looking at, and we're calling it data source something because again, it's responsible for basically validating data sources of PVCs. Saad, you weren't here last week. Do you have any feelings about this?
I like the volume populator name.
Okay, for the CRD.
For the CRD. And then, so
Okay.
Is there any kind of pushback to including volume populator in the controller name?
You mean call it like volume populator controller?
Yeah, or
Populator?
just volume populator even?
Well, this is, yeah,
Or even PVC populator?
we really need to distinguish it from the things that will actually be doing, because remember that this is going to be this dust singleton that basically tells you when you have PVCs with a data source that doesn't match a populator. Then you'll have a bunch of other controllers potentially running in the system that will actually be doing volume population,
Got
and
it.
those are the volume populators in my mind. Like if we were to write a controller that allowed you to, you know, one of our canonical examples pointed at a GitHub repo. So some CRD that represents a GitHub repo, then you create a PVC that points to that CR that refers to a GitHub repo. Then there's a populator controller that would populate that specific PVC, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the one that tells you when you have an invalid data source.
And so
And
the primary purpose of this is just validation?
yeah, and this is something that we'll want all distros to include along with the CRD starting whenever this feature becomes beta.
I see.
Because once you enable that any data source feature gate in Kubernetes by making it beta, then you open the door to people creating PVCs that will go nowhere. And this is the thing that will tell you, they'll provide you the feedback that your PVC is going to go nowhere. So we would like this to be sort of a universal, very small controller that is always present when the CRD is present, and ideally is always present when the feature gate is turned on.
Got it. Yeah, if this is primarily used for validation, then I think we should drop the controller word from there, because that is misleading. It kind of
Yeah, it's not like a
indicates,
snapshot controller where it's actually
yeah,
like creating objects and binding them and doing hard work.
So
right.
do you see this one in the future to have like a expanded role to do something else more than validation?
Well, my vision of populators is that, you know, each kind that you can populate from will have its own controller, possibly. I mean, there's nothing to stop one controller from doing two or more kinds, but there's not going to be some universal thing that handles all of these. There's going to be lots of separate controllers for the various things, and it's possible that some of them could be merged in with like CSI sidecars. Like external provisioner could handle population for some things, but there will always be some that just have a generic implementation that's not tied to CSI, that just, you know, takes a CRD and populates from it. Like, and we're hoping that, you know, the backups are one of those things down the road. You know, the whole motivation for this is to enable restoring from backup, and that needs to be something that can stand alone as a backup populator or backup restore controller, or whatever you want to call that thing.
So ideally, you want to leave it kind of generic enough that you could add such functionality in the future if you wanted.
Well, yeah, I can't think of anything specific we'd want to add to this. What we did talk about,
Got it.
the possibility of wanting to do some level of validation on the volume populator CRDs themselves. For example, maybe to detect collisions between two volume populators that refer to the same group kind, like that warrants like a warning of some kind. But like the way to handle that would be some sort of a validating webhook, not a controller.
Got it.
So this thing really has a very limited responsibility, and it's limited to just, you know, when we flip the feature gate on and people start creating PVCs with other data sources, we just want them to know, hey, you know, this PVC isn't going to get bound
Got it.
unless something changes.
So let's just call it data source validator,
Data
because
source
that's what it is.
validator. Is there precedence for calling things validators that aren't validating webhooks?
I haven't seen that.
I mean, I'm fine with that. It certainly is more descriptive, but I wouldn't want to make someone think this is a validating webhook either.
Yeah,
Because
I think that's fine. If we could write in the documentation, you know, this is not a webhook, this is a controller, and here's why in the README
Validation
file.
controller. Data source validation controller is super long.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to go too nuts about the name, but I just wanted to get it something that wasn't just me making things up. Data source validator, I do like, because it's very specific, but that's what it is doing. It's looking at the data source and it's checking if it's going to.
So we can always rename it in the future, right? If we found that we want this to do more things.
I guess so. I mean, this comes back to the, you know, how does the Kubernetes community push distros to include things that are not in the tree, you know, and if, assuming we can convince them to include the CRD and this controller and its RBAC objects in all of the distros starting in 121 or 122 or whenever we declare this beta, then like if we rename it after that, how much of a hassle is that going to cause for all those distros?
I think if it goes to beta, probably at that time we need to rename, make the name right?
Well, yeah. As long as we change the name before it goes to beta, you're right. There's no problem. But once we start telling distros, hey, you're supposed to include this if you want to support volume populators, you know, which will be a beta feature.
If it's already beta, then you rename. That's probably there.
Yeah.
Probably will be some like deprecation period or something. I'm not sure how long. We need to check. A couple releases, maybe. I'm not sure.
I wouldn't want to go through a deprecation period. So yeah,
you have to support both for some time.
If we can live with data source validator as a controller name. I'm cool with that. And then the RBAC objects could be similarly named. How about the event source? Would that also just be the controller name? Data source
Yep,
validator?
it should be the same as the controller name.
Okay. And then the reason, I came up with unrecognized data source kind.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Okay.
Or maybe unsupported, or
Well,
I guess you could have a controller installed that supports it, and then this validator says it's or technically unsupported. So
well, the
I
opposite
guess
could happen.
unrecognized.
Like all this thing is going to do is check that there is a CRD that matches it, and then if there is a CRD, it's going to say everything's kosher. But if the CRD exists and no corresponding controller exists, it's still not going to go anywhere. It's just that someone created a volume populator CR that matches the data source and then didn't install the controller, and then that's on them. So
okay, I think unrecognized is fine.
All right. Okay, cool. Next topic. And I'll write down these notes after the meeting to save time. So Sheng, I saw some updates from you on the external provisioner bug 553 or 533. Put the wrong number
I think
here.
it's already merged, right? Is that your bug fix?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
there was a
merged.
testing
Yeah,
issue.
there's some CI issue. Yeah, it's because there was some run config that was there, but then because the snapshot controller V1 just got merged yesterday, so we started to see those problems. So just got it fixed, just like right before this.
Yeah, I got the
email. It was running some. It was using a
12:58.
canary images.
Yeah.
So it was okay, but until we updated the snapshot controller to use V1, then it started to fail. So yeah, we just figured out this morning.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was not going to have problems. Okay, so that was an easy one. As for so progress on the various changes, I have not been making a ton of changes. I haven't pushed another commit to the Hello Populators repo yet, or the Hello Populator repo yet. But I'm still working on the sort of splitting apart the. I mean, there is a new commit that sort of refactors everything to show the latest way that I'm doing populating, and it's actually simpler than the example that I showed a couple weeks ago because it doesn't clone the PV, it just rebinds the PV, and that allowed me to remove a couple dozen lines of code. But yeah, I'm still trying to find the line between the reusable library piece and then the hello populator piece, which will just be a sample that sits on top of the library. And so hopefully I'll have more on that when we meet again. I don't know if anyone looked at that code or has any comments on it, if there have been any reviews, or any reviews on the data source validator change that needs to be renamed from populator controller to that. If no if no one's been looking at the code, that's fine. I'll be making updates later this week. And then the only other order of business is when to meet again. So we have holidays next week and the week after. And so logically, I would want to cancel both of those meetings and have our next meeting be January 5th. And hopefully there will be substantial progress by then. Hopefully.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
All right. So we had a problem over Thanksgiving where I don't know how to send calendar updates for the invite.
I can go ahead and delete it, and
okay.
I think that should send out the calendar updates. And in the agenda, just go ahead and mark it as canceled for each of those dates to make it clear.
Yeah, I'll update the agenda. So if you could cancel both the 22nd and the 29th, then we'll meet up again on the 5th, and we'll have more to talk about by then.
Okay, done.
Thanks, Sud. Anything else from anybody? All right. Well, I'll give you back 40 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.